This is a level 2 Vancouver Hypnotherapy School talk about client relationships. And with everything in technical hypnotherapy, we look at first the creation of authority, then association, then compliance, and then suggestion. Now that's part of the process of a therapy session. And that's really just background for what we're talking about now, which is the way you understand your client and you build a relationship with the client. Now, when someone comes in to Vancouver Hypnotherapy, we're looking for a number of pieces of information. If they're coming in for something very superficial, one doesn't need to know everything. But if they're coming in for a therapy process that is to overcome something like anxiety, or an addiction, or perhaps a phobia, or some of those other issues like that, then we really do need to understand that client well. So, one of the first things we ask about is, number one, what's the issue? Now, we ask that question not because we want them to say, it's a phobia I have of birds, but we want to hear them explain their phobia to us. Now, the moment they start talking about it, you're already moving to a solution, actually, because when someone vocalizes their problem, it's very interesting with bulimics, actually. Many of them cannot say the word bulimia. They are so ashamed of it. Now, that's a very extreme case, but when you look at other issues, the moment they can articulate it, the moment they can actually talk about it, they're actually already moving forward. If it's something like, oh, I get vertigo, and they've just accepted it, well, learning that there's a level of acceptance of the issue is very valuable information. But what's the issue as described by the client? That's key. Now, you'll notice in the course of this that my writing gets progressively worse.
Oh, your writing is great.
2, is it improving, becoming more difficult, or is it stable? And again, these are questions which, they're very subjective. We're not really learning about the issue at all here. We're not even interested in the issue, actually.
Well, you said, what's the issue?
Yeah, but it's because we want to hear the client elucidating.
Okay.
Is it improving, or stable, or becoming worse? Because we want to hear the client's interpretation. Now again, this is highly subjective. We're not really interested in what they say. We want to get them to start touching this issue, describing it, putting it out into the spotlight. So we're to some degree manipulating them. We're getting them to talk about it, and indeed it could already be actually described as a form of compliance. And this is before any induction or anything like this. What we're doing really is trying to get them to pull it out into the daylight and talk about it. And then this is a key one. Do you know where this came from? Now, they may or may not know. They may have an idea which could be completely wrong or not. But again, let's get them giving us information. Okay, so these are 3 basic questions which are just putting it out there to let them start talking about it. And in this entire process, actually it's all about getting to know the client, looking at the way they talk about it, listening to their language. If they say, well, you know, it's just a little thing, but, that tells you a lot. Or, I've got a problem with claustrophobia, I hate being in small places. And then, as they talk about it, they might say, and people with problems with claustrophobia don't get in elevators. People with problems of this sort don't live in high places. People with, in other words, they're dissociating themselves from the problem.
Oh, they're by saying people.
Yeah. So listening to the language that they're using. And there's actually a very good book.
Mom drives me crazy, but she's really a nice person. The rationalizing.
Yeah.
You have to be good, you have to be.
Right, yeah, that could be. But listening to the way the words work, you can actually get right into their head. Now, there is a book called I Know What You're Thinking. I think it's not by Lynn Truss, it's by Lynn Glass, I think her name might be. I Know What You're Thinking. And it's actually a book about seeing the meaning behind the words, seeing the meaning behind the body language. When someone starts talking to you about the terrible nature of their problem, and they just can't get over this. And, oh, yeah, well, the minute this is happening, you're getting close to what the real source of the problem is.
Or they get up and start pacing the room.
Absolutely. Listening and watching the client is before any hypnosis takes place is telling you a huge amount about what's going on. Now, I often say to people, forget about the issue. The claustrophobia doesn't matter. And these people who say, have you got a script for claustrophobia? Okay, at that point, you know this person knows nothing whatsoever about hypnosis. What it's about is, the issue is merely the way anxiety manifests itself. Now, what makes this person anxious? So when you get to know the client, you don't even really need to know very much about the issue at all. But by getting to know the client, you can see where their anxiety comes from. And of course, if you take care of that, of course, there is no problem with claustrophobia. So the issue itself, the presenting issue,
Chewing one's cheek.
chewing one's cheek, it's probably got
She's
very
under
little to do.
pressure.
You know, if one said, oh, I need a script for helping me work with someone who's chewing their cheek, well, forget about it. That's not really working with hypnosis, not proper hypnotherapy. What you need to do is get to know the client and then try and see what is it that creates that particular manifestation of anxiety or fear or whatever the underlying issue really are.
The driving force behind it.
Okay, so how do we really get to know our client at that level? And that's really what we're looking at here. How do we get to know what drives our client? Now, there's several good answers to that question. One interesting way is to look at the outcomes. Oh, these haven't got question marks. That's really smart of me. Getting OCD. Okay, so one thing to do is say, well, look at what are their outcomes. Oh, they always come second in class. Well, that's interesting. Or what else do we know about them? They've been engaged 4 times but never married. Well, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, look for patterns, because that's going to help you get to know what's going on for your client. It may not give you the absolute clue. It may not point to it with giant red arrows, but you might start to get close. I use a process which I describe as mapping the client. If you think of the client as a landscape that you have to create and draw in and map, then what would be the key features? Okay, their father died when they were 7 years old. Well, that's going to be an important one. That's a big mountain in this guy's background. What else? They were divorced at 42. They don't get to see their children because their wife has real problems with him having an alcohol problem. Okay, well, that's a pretty big rift right there, right? So that's somewhere in the map. What else is there in this map? What does the shoreline look like? What is the verdant aspects? What are the successes in this person's life? You might think of those as the forests on this map. And what are the repeating features in this landscape? Now, there's actually quite a good tool which we've come across and I've talked about on numerous occasions. We call it a Mercedes analysis. This is not a very good circle, but you get the idea. This looks more like an AccuRod. Now, in this one we have self, family and relationships, and work. Now, the idea of this, in this instance, is we're looking at sources of stress. And there's many ways you can use this division, by the way, this setup. But for the moment, we're just looking at its sources of stress. If you said to a client, at work, what's your biggest source of stress? Within your family and your relationships, what's your biggest source of stress? And within yourself, what's your biggest source of stress? Well, I've got various health issues. Or there's a guy who I recently got put into the same department with. I hate the guy's guts. I just can't get on with him. And in family relationships, well, my middle child is really difficult for me. Okay, well, we're getting a picture. It's not a complete picture, but it's an indication. Now, in fact, we use this Mercedes analysis in a therapy of forms where we take each stress and we say, okay, with each one of those, or one from each of these, if we can work that down, if we can bring that level of stress down in this area, in these areas, then we can improve the whole massively.
Could you do the same with sources of success in work?
Yes, you
and
absolutely
family?
could. Absolutely. You say, okay, let's identify where are our successes at work,
Then you're
where are our
finding the
successes in
internal
family.
resources too.
Right. And the key is that they also have to understand that the self is very important. Because what a lot of people will do is they will put their energy into their family. Let's look at the wife who, she's a successful journalist, quits work at 33 to look after the kids, and suddenly the family and relationships becomes huge, the work is non-existent, and the self begins to go down as well. Before very long, she's not a Mercedes, she's something different entirely.
There's a wheel that's not working, it's not going to roll anymore.
You've got to keep these more or less balanced. Now, when you take away the family, when the divorce comes along at 45, and she's not working, and she hasn't done any work on herself, well, what's left? One big hole.
God, you have my life.
No, but it is true. A lot of people fall into that trap.
No, that's midlife crisis with women. With
Absolutely.
Kids are up and out of school, right? Hubby's still got his work, or he's leaving, and then boom, and nothing.
Exactly. Now, if we can keep balance in this in our life, well, we're pretty much getting as good a life as we're likely to get. We would like to have a reasonable amount of time for family and relationships. Work is good. It contributes to who we are. But we also spend a good amount of time on ourselves. Now by that might be going to church. It might be getting on my bicycle and cycling to Victoria. It might be just acknowledging one day a week, actually I don't need to see everybody. I want to spend it on my own.
I can see now.
And that's really valuable. So the Mercedes, we use the Mercedes analysis to look at stress, but we can also use it as a planning tool. Okay, let's see, where do we want our work to be in 3 years? Where do we want our family and relationships to be in 3 years? Where do we want our self-development? Yeah, I'd like to get back to 80 kilos. Those are, you can plant it at 3 years, at 5 years, even at 6 months. And then you've got a progression. Now that could be the basis of 4 or 5 sessions with a client. First identify it, then okay, what do we have to do in each one of these areas to get a little closer to that? How do we measure those successes? Okay, now we're here at this 3-month point. How do we get to the 6 months point on the transition through to this 5-year goal? Now I also do one, which is kind of an odd one. I do one in the middle of June and I do one in the middle of December, where I just review how am I doing at work, how am I doing in family and relationships, and what's my work on myself. So it's like an annual report, but every 6 months, an interim report, where I'm just checking in with myself, seeing am I moving in the directions I want to move. Sometimes I am, sometimes I have a bit of a recession there. But generally speaking, I hope, I'm moving in the right direction. But it's one of the crucial things about this is there's an iron bar in the Mercedes symbol between self and work. I am not what my work is. I'm Rob Hadley. There's a difference between me and my family. And my relationships do not define me. So this whole idea is actually a pretty sound one. Now within a hypnosis context, if you're hypnotizing someone, you can tie this beautifully to the suggestion that every time you pass a Mercedes dealership, every time you see the Mercedes symbol on the back of a car, you are going to remind yourself it is all about balance. So getting to know the client, but then obviously in this instance applying these ideas, absolutely huge. I'll just double check this recording. Is it running properly? Yes, it is. That's good. Okay. So this is a very, very good tool for getting to know your client. Now obviously it's not the only one. When you get to a stage where you've got lots and lots of clients, it's always so tempting to go to this idea of I'm going to have an intake form. Tempting, possibly time efficient, but it can kind of work against you. If I sit down opposite Svetlana and say, okay, Svetlana, what's going on? I'm probably doing much better therapy than you are ever going to get from an intake form. It's nice to know someone's date of birth. It's even nice to know what their phone number is. And those things, yeah, absolutely. But really, the way they describe themselves sitting opposite you, there's a relationship there. you're actually going to start to know the client better. When you notice what they're all